Good afternoon. We are continuing our discussion on Fanon, on violence in the wretched of the earth. This is the last time we discuss Fanon in this class. And I invite you to open your course link to watch the slides while I'm speaking. Therefore, today I will discuss academic misconduct when we write papers, plagiarism, the tone we use when we write an essay, and the imaginary audience. After that, I will recap the last class briefly. And then I will also briefly present international context in violence as a case for reparations, and we will discuss. The class will finish earlier today, since I would like to use the last 20 minutes of the class to discuss with people who are interested in doing oral presentation instead of writing an essay. Therefore, if you are interested in doing a presentation, please stay, otherwise you can go home. Academic misconduct is not always on purpose. For example, sometimes you want to paraphrase something that the author said, but you don't realize that you have already copied 4 words in a row that come from the original source. And when you do that, it's a misconduct, it's plagiarism. You have, when it's more than 4 words, it has to be on quotation marks and appropriately referenced. And in the university, it is considered a plagiarism, and it's so crucial that I will take off 5 points out of 40 whenever I see a case of plagiarism like this. It's just for you to develop a good habit to paraphrase correctly or to put quotation marks correctly. Also, I know some of you are very driven, and this is for you, last tips that I forgot to mention Tuesday. In the introduction, you do not want to add unnecessary biographical details on Fanon. And therefore, if you want to write an excellent introduction or an excellent text, you avoid phrases like, he was a brilliant philosopher, all over the world he was known. And so this is, to me, it's fillers, because we already know that, it's very obvious. So what we want to do is to go straight to the point. So, okay, you connected with the audience with your anecdote, and you leave your anecdote and you go straight to the point and you say, I will defend this in this paper. I will argue this in this paper, and I will proceed this way. I will develop this, and after that, I will do this, I will compare. And then in the development, you talk about Fanon's position on this particular subject. So remember, you leave your example just in the introduction, okay? It's not, the text is not you trying to analyze your example through Fanon. Okay, you watch the movie and it talks about racism, but okay, that's good, but it's not for the development. Okay, it's just the introduction. And also, do not talk about yourself. I believe it's fine, but no, I feel uncomfortable. Don't talk about your feelings. It's not relevant. Don't talk about your life. It's not relevant either. You want to have this professional tone. And so you put a distance between you and your readers. You don't talk about yourself. Also, if you want to write an excellent paper, I suggest you anticipate potential objections that one can raise when they read your text. So that's very good. If you are able to do that, you can say, I concede that one might see this way, but my perspective is better because this and this. So you are able to answer objections. That makes your arguments more convincing. Okay, so you develop the objection until the end. You don't dismiss, you are not condescending, you acknowledge that this objection is valid, but you want to say that still your position is better. And lastly, remember that the grading is anonymous. Therefore, you don't want to provide any identificatory information on the name of the file and in the text itself. So what I want you to get from this is it's important that you don't use a casual language. You are professional. You don't talk about how you feel, and you try very hard to imagine what someone who has different point of view would answer to your essay. Sometimes it's hard, and it's allowed to use artificial intelligence. For example, I know that Grammarly has a function that says suggest counter arguments. So you can use that. It's not cheating. And then if you think this counter argument is valuable, you can include that in your text, and then you include your answer to that counter argument. That would make your text excellent. So what we discussed, wait a second, I'm gonna take a look. Last week, we talked a little bit about colonized intellectuals. And now on violence, Fanon talks about peasant masses as opposed to colonized intellectuals, because sometimes they are very different. So colonized intellectuals are part of the elite. They had this privilege of gaining some education. And so they're part of the bourgeoisie. And so they tend to promote this reformist, non-violent politics, as opposed to the peasant masses who would have this violent, revolutionary, no compromise politics. And so you can see that in this comparison, there is this, if we can say so, Marxist-friendly discourse, a little bit of class struggle analysis, And the difference between the colonized intellectual is their knowledge that comes from the education that the colonists gave them, whereas the peasant masses' knowledge comes from violent struggles and the dialectics between them and the colonists, the violence and the counter-violence. If you decide to talk about violence in your essay, I strongly suggest that somewhere in your analysis you discuss the concept praxis. That is because it is a key concept in the discussion. And therefore, as I just said earlier, violent struggle builds the consciousness of the masses, okay? Builds the knowledge, so builds the consciousness. So praxis builds the consciousness of the masses. And if the description that Fanon provides is not enough, you can, I suggest that you look up for Marx's definition of praxis and Sartre, Jean-Paul Sartre's definition of praxis, because that's the definition of praxis that Fanon used, but it's really simple. It's the idea that it's an action that is decided by, it's an action that has a goal, but the action was informed by theory before. And so it's, the action has definite goals, but then there is this dialectics when you are in the action between you and the colonizer. And so you have this action, the colonizer responds this way, and then your knowledge increase because of this interaction. So the theory developed through the action. So it's a cycle, okay? You have this theory, action, and then theory, action. So it's just that, the praxis. And that's how it builds the consciousness of the masses. And also another key concept that you may want to include in your essay is sociogeny. Because in Black Skin, White Mask, you have this, we have theoretically, if we want to understand the psyche of the colonized, instead of using psychoanalysis, Freud psychoanalysis or Lacan psychoanalysis, that is very from the individual and the family, you use this sociogeny that involves an analysis of the society and so the environmental factors. And then when you go to violence, sociogeny is this idea that the self is no longer just one body, but is the body of all the other people, your family, and then the group that is oppressed by the colonized. So this idea of the self that is expanded to all the people that is oppressed. Therefore, now we can move on to the last part of the chapter, violence, international context. So decolonization will happen in Algeria. Fanon knows that because he sees that in 1960, many French colonies are decolonized. But there is a problem that because they became new countries, these colonies, they don't get the support from multinationals. So the monopoles I'm not sure if monopoles, if you say that in English. So they withdraw their investment in the former colonies. And Europe take back all the capital they invested in the former colonies, and they take all the infrastructures. So the result is poverty, hunger in the nations. So this is how Europe keep, sorry, Europe keep maintaining their power over the African nations, even though they are now decolonized. Because what Europe says is, if you want us to leave the infrastructures there, you have to sign economic pacts. You have to leave some military here to protect our investment. So this is the problem, the pressure that new African nations endure, the poverty as a consequence. But Fanon says that the wealth of these countries, the wealth of imperialist countries is actually developing countries' wealth, and therefore helping developing countries is not charity, because Europe took the gold and natural resources from these countries. And it's important for the colonized to understand that they deserve that money, that this is their money. And it is also crucial that the colonists understand that they have to pay. So this is very straightforward arguments that you are certainly familiar with if you study political science or political philosophy. So Fanon said there is no European miracle. If Europe is rich, it's because of the work of enslaved people. That's how they got rich. And also, why is it okay for Germany to pay reparations to Europe, to Israel, and to offer their apologies to Jewish people, but Europe does not have to do that for African colonies, even though they deported, they massacred, they forced colonized to work, and they put them into slavery in order to steal their gold and diamonds. And also, so the truth is that Europe has a debt towards its former colonies. And also the last argument is that capitalism, international capitalism will collapse if the multinational refuse to invest in new African countries, because new African countries will stop buying from these multinationals, and so the money will stop circulating, and what will happen is that I don't know how you say usine. Manufacturers will close, and there will be an increase in unemployment in Europe. Therefore, Fanon concludes that it is in the interest of monopoles or multinationals to develop, to invest in developing countries instead of investing in nuclear weapon and the Cold War. And masses, European masses must wake up. That's Fanon's conclusion on this topic. And so now that it's over, now that our discussion on Fanon is over, what we can see is that, of course, he has influence on the Black Panthers Party, as Huey Newton and Bobby Seale said themselves in their autobiographies. So Fanon inspired Black social movements in the 60s, 70s. And you can also see in Malcolm X discourse in the 60s, especially the ballot or the bullet, that there are similar ideas, even though we don't know whether Malcolm X was aware of Fanon. We see that even that they share this idea that capitalism destroyed, colonized, or destroyed Black people. But the point is not to destroy capitalism. It is to use them for the freedom of the oppressed. So you have to convince the capitalists that it is in their interest to help the self-determination of the oppressed people. So it's really the same idea that in order to convince people to help you, you have to convince them that they will benefit from this. They will gain some profit. And also, to go back to this notion of sociogeny, we can see that even though in violence, Fanon talks about this notion of the self that expands to the rest of the group, it does not want them to stay that way forever. It's a sacrifice, and you acknowledge that. And so you see that in the international aspect of the chapter, he said, okay, you made a lot of sacrifices, but now Europe has to pay, and it's okay. So you see that this political version of sociogeny is not meant to be permanent in that way. So next week, we will move on to Frank B. Wilderson, a professor in California who was very inspired by Fanon and who founded with other thinkers like Jared Sexton and Saidiya Hartman the Afro-pessimist movement that is very popular today in the world. So you will just have to read for next week the introduction of the book. It's only 7 pages, I think. And now we can move on to the discussion. Thank you.